What happens when one of America's most beloved comedic actors goes head-to-head with a late-night host who's lost all sense of boundaries? You won't believe what unfolds when Steve Carell sits down for what should have been a friendly chat about his latest project, only to find himself trapped in an increasingly hostile interrogation that spirals completely out of control. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two comedy legends clash in the most uncomfortable television moment of the year. The Late Show's studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy as Steve Carell made his way to the guest chair, waving to the enthusiastic audience who erupted in applause for the beloved star of The Office and countless hit films. What nobody in that studio could have predicted was that within minutes, this seemingly routine promotional appearance would transform into television's most jaw-dropping confrontation in recent memory. Stephen Colbert emerged from behind his desk with his trademark grin, but those who know the host well might have noticed something different in his demeanor, a sharpness in his eyes that suggested tonight would be anything but typical. The pleasantries began normally enough, with Colbert welcoming Carell and making light jokes about his latest projects, but the undertone was unmistakably different from the usual warm banter between comedy colleagues. "Steve, great to have you back on the show," Colbert began, settling into his chair with an almost predatory ease. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about your career lately, and I have to ask, don't you ever get tired of playing the same character over and over again?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Carell's smile faltered for just a moment, a barely perceptible shift that the cameras caught, but the studio audience missed entirely. It was clear this wasn't the softball question he'd been expecting, and the veteran actor's years of media training kicked in as he attempted to deflect with humor. "Well, Stephen, I'd say that's rich coming from someone who literally played a character named Stephen Colbert for 9 years, Carell responded with a chuckle, trying to maintain the light atmosphere. "But I think every role teaches you something different, even if there are similarities." But Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, Carell's deflection seemed to embolden him, and his next question cut even deeper. "Right, but let's be honest. Here, Michael Scott, the dad in Little Miss Sunshine, even your recent dramatic roles, they're all just variations of the same awkward, well-meaning guy, aren't they? I mean, when was the last time you actually challenged yourself as an actor?" The studio audience began to sense something was off. The usual rhythm of late-night banter had been replaced by something far more uncomfortable, and you could feel the tension building in the room. Carell's publicist, sitting in the wings, shifted nervously in her chair, clearly not expecting this line of questioning from what was supposed to be a friendly promotional appearance. Carell's response was measured, but firm. "I think that's a pretty reductive way to look at any actor's work, Stephen. Every character I play comes from a different place, serves a different story. If you're seeing similarities, maybe that says more about your perspective than it does about my choices as an actor." The comeback was sharp, professional, but it clearly struck a nerve with Colbert, whose demeanor shifted noticeably. Gone was any pretense of friendly late-night chat show host, replaced by something that felt more like a prosecuting attorney, closing in on a witness. "My perspective?" Colbert's voice took on an edge that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. "Steve, I've been watching you for years, and I have to say, for someone who's made a career out of playing characters who think they're smarter than they actually are, you seem to have a pretty high opinion of your own artistic merit." The insult was delivered with Colbert's trademark smile, but there was no mistaking the venom behind it. The studio audience fell silent, unsure whether this was some kind of elaborate bit or if they were witnessing something genuinely hostile unfold before their eyes. Carell's jaw tightened, and for the first time since sitting down, his composure began to crack. "I'm sorry, what exactly are you trying to accomplish here, Stephen?" Carell asked, his voice remaining steady, but his eyes flashing with the first hint of real anger. Did I do something to offend you, or is this just how you treat guests now? Colbert leaned forward in his chair, his smile widening in a way that somehow made him look less friendly, not more. Oh, I'm just trying to have an honest conversation. Steve, isn't that what talk shows are supposed to be about? Honesty? Or would you prefer we just stick to the usual promotional nonsense where I pretend your latest movie is groundbreaking cinema? The gloves were officially off now, and everyone in the studio could feel it. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every uncomfortable moment as two comedy veterans who should have been natural allies found themselves locked in an increasingly bitter confrontation that was about to get much, much worse. What started as an unexpected line of questioning was rapidly evolving into something far more personal and vicious, and as Carell straightened in his chair, preparing for what was clearly going to be his response, the audience held its collective breath, sensing that they were about to witness something that would be talked about for years to come. Carell's response came with a controlled fury that immediately shifted the entire dynamic of the interview. You know what, Stephen? I came here tonight, as a courtesy, to promote a project I'm proud of, and to have what I thought would be a respectful conversation between colleagues. But if you want to turn this into some kind of personal attack, then let's talk about honesty. The studio fell dead silent. Even the production crew, who had seen countless interviews over the years, stopped what they were doing to focus entirely on what was unfolding. Carell leaned forward, matching Colbert's aggressive posture with one of his own. You want to talk about playing the same character over and over again? Let's talk about Stephen Colbert, the guy who built his entire career on hiding behind a persona, who spent nearly a decade pretending to be someone else because he was too afraid to show audiences who he really was. And now that you're supposedly being yourself, you've become this bitter, cynical host who apparently gets his kicks from ambushing guests. Colbert's smile finally disappeared completely, replaced by a look of genuine shock that quickly morphed into barely contained rage. The audience could sense they were witnessing something unprecedented, a complete breakdown of the usual late-night television decorum that neither man seemed able or willing to stop. That's rich coming from someone whose idea of range is deciding whether to play the bumbling dad or the bumbling boss, Colbert shot back, his voice rising slightly. At least when I was playing a character, I was doing something innovative, something that had never been done before on television. You've been coasting on the same shtick for 20 years. The personal nature of the attacks was escalating rapidly, and you could see members of the production team frantically signaling from the wings, clearly trying to figure out whether to cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue. Carell's publicist had moved closer to the stage area, phone in hand, obviously preparing for damage control. Innovative? Carell's voice dripped with disbelief. Stephen, you took a political satire show and turned it into your personal therapy session. Every night it's the same routine. You get up there, make the same predictable jokes about whatever politician you're obsessed with that week, and then act like you're some kind of moral authority. At least when I'm playing a character, I'm not pretending it's profound social commentary. The accusation hit like a thunderbolt. Colbert's face flushed red, and for a moment it looked like he might actually stand up from his chair. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every micro-expression as the host struggled to maintain some semblance of control. Therapy session? Colbert's voice was now openly hostile. I'm using my platform to hold people accountable, to actually engage with the issues that matter. While you're out there making movies about middle-aged men having midlife crises, I'm actually trying to make a difference. Make a difference? Carell laughed, but there was no humor in it. Stephen, you're a talk show host, not a journalist. You're not changing the world. You're just preaching to people who already agree with you while making millions of dollars doing it. And apparently you've started believing your own hype so much that you think you can treat your guests like garbage. The atmosphere in the studio had become so toxic that audience members were visibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and exchanging worried glances. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was watching two successful men tear each other apart, on national television, and nobody knew how to stop it. Colbert stood up from his chair, an unprecedented move that sent shockwaves through the studio. You know what your problem is, Steve? You've spent so long playing nice guys that you actually think you are one. But sitting here tonight, listening to you lecture me about authenticity while you've built your entire career on being likable, it's honestly pathetic. Carell rose to meet him, and suddenly the two men were standing face to face across the desk, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. And you've spent so long thinking you're better than everyone else that you've forgotten basic human decency. This isn't hosting, Stephen. This is bullying, plain and simple. The accusation of bullying seemed to be the final straw for Colbert, whose composure completely shattered. Bullying? I'm asking you real questions instead of lobbing you softballs, and you call it bullying? Maybe the problem isn't me, Steve. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle being challenged by someone who sees through your act. My act? Carell's voice rose for the first time, his own anger finally breaking through completely. The only act here is you pretending to be some kind of intellectual when you're really just a failed comedian who lucked into a hosting gig. At least I earned my success by actually being good at what I do, instead of riding the coattails of better writers and producers for 2 decades. The personal attacks had reached a point of no return, and everyone in the studio knew it. This wasn't just a heated exchange anymore. It was character assassination happening in real time, and the worst part was that neither man seemed able to stop themselves from escalating further. Colbert's face was now completely flushed with rage as he leaned across his desk, pointing an accusatory finger at Carell. Failed comedian? Failed comedian? I've won more Emmy Awards than you've even been nominated for. I've interviewed presidents, Nobel Prize winners, world leaders, and you want to talk about coasting? Look in the mirror, Steve. When was the last time you did anything that wasn't just a rehash of Michael Scott? The mention of his most famous characters seemed to strike Carell at his core. His entire demeanor changed, and the measured professionalism he'd maintained throughout most of the interview completely evaporated. You want to bring up The Office? Fine. Let's talk about how that show actually made people happy, brought joy into their lives instead of just feeding them the same political garbage night after night. At least Michael Scott had heart. What do you have besides smugness and a superiority complex? The studio audience was now completely silent, many covering their mouths in shock at what they were witnessing. This had gone far beyond uncomfortable, television into something genuinely disturbing. Two successful men destroying each other's reputations in real time with an audience watching helplessly. Colbert's laugh was bitter and cutting. Heart? Is that what you call it? Playing the same bumbling fool for 9 seasons while everyone around you did the real comedic heavy lifting? Jim and Pam carried that show, and you know it. You were just the pathetic boss everyone felt sorry for. That final insult seemed to break something fundamental in Carell. His face went pale, then red, and when he spoke, his voice was shaking with a fury that few people had ever seen from the typically mild-mannered actor. You know what, Stephen? I've had enough of this. You want to attack my work? Fine. You want to attack my career? Whatever. But don't you dare sit there and diminish something that brought happiness to millions of people just because you're jealous that nobody will remember your late-night show 5 years after it's canceled. Jealous, Colbert screamed, his voice echoing through the studio. Jealous of what? Your straight-to-streaming movie career? Your desperate attempts to be taken seriously as a dramatic actor? You're a one-trick pony who got lucky, and deep down, you know it. The insult was the final breaking point. Carell stepped back from the desk, his hands shaking with rage, and when he spoke, his voice cut through the studio like a blade. And you're a bitter, washed-up comedian who thinks political commentary makes you important. But here's the truth, Stephen. You're not important. You're not changing minds. You're just another angry voice in an echo chamber. And when this show ends, Nobody will care what Stephen Colbert thinks about anything. The studio fell into complete silence. Even the production crew had stopped moving, everyone frozen by the sheer brutality of what had just been said. Colbert's face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, and then pure, unadulterated rage. "Get out," Colbert said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow more menacing than when he'd been shouting. "Get out of my studio right now!" Carell straightened his jacket and looked directly into the camera, his composure returning now that the decision had been made. "Gladly. This has been the most unprofessional experience of my entire career, and I've worked with some real pieces of work. But you, Stephen, you take the cake." He turned to walk away, but Colbert wasn't finished. "Running away, Steve? Just like you ran away from the office when it got too hard? Just like you run away from every real challenge in your career?" Carell stopped dead in his tracks and slowly turned back around. The look on his face was one of complete disgust. "You know what the difference is between us, Stephen? When I left the office, it was because I wanted to try new things, to grow as an artist. You're still doing the same exact thing you were doing 20 years ago, just with different jokes. And the saddest part is, you actually think you're profound." With that final devastating blow, Carell began walking toward the exit, but Colbert had one last desperate attempt to get the final word. "Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Michael Scott." Carell paused at the edge of the stage and delivered his parting shot with surgical precision. At least Michael Scott was loved. "Can you say the same?" The silence that followed was deafening. Carell walked off the stage without looking back, leaving Colbert standing alone behind his desk, his face a mixture of rage and humiliation. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of the host's obvious struggle to regain his composure, as the studio audience sat in stunned silence. After what felt like an eternity, Colbert finally managed to speak, his voice hoarse and shaky. "Well, folks, we'll be right back after this commercial break." But his attempt at normalcy fell flat. Everyone could see he was barely holding it together. As the cameras finally cut away and the studio lights dimmed, the full weight of what had just happened began to sink in. Production assistants scrambled to figure out how to handle the aftermath, while audience members pulled out their phones to immediately share what they'd witnessed. The confrontation was already being uploaded to social media, and within minutes, clips of the explosive exchange were spreading across every platform. In the span of less than 30 minutes, what should have been a routine promotional interview had transformed into one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history. The damage to both men's reputations was immediate and severe, but it was clear that Colbert had emerged as the undisputed villain of the piece. His unprovoked attacks and unprofessional behavior had been witnessed by millions, and the Internet's judgment was swift and merciless. The show never recovered from that night. Ratings plummeted as clips of the confrontation went viral, and Colbert's reputation as a professional host was forever tarnished by his inexplicable decision to attack a beloved guest for no apparent reason. Meanwhile, Carell's dignified exit and measured responses throughout most of the confrontation only enhanced his reputation as a class act who had been pushed too far by an out-of-control host. As the studio finally emptied and the cleanup began, one thing was certain: television history had been made, and not in a way that anyone involved would ever want to remember.